So glad you're here. We're going to turn off the air conditioning as soon as we start. So if it's too cold, is it too cold? No? It's good. Okay.
She asked about you today. I want to tell her tomorrow.
I want to see her.
I want to tell her.
You can bring it. YouTube and Facebook can't see us in the audience, huh?
They can see the back of your heads from Zoom. But that's about it.
Oh,
No, not
because
really,
it
not-
doesn't show a lot of
Not-
people.
Not even the people, it's only showing.
Oh, okay, so I
So-
guess
Thank
not.
God, thank God.
YouTube and Facebook won't see you at all, it only sees her and the.
Are you telling us that people did say they saw you, or are you asking? Okay,
She's
asking. Okay.
There was more people the first night.
Yeah, that's how it always goes.
It happens.
People are busy.
I had an emergency yesterday.
We missed you.
Thank you.
Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Right here.
My computer tells me it's 7 o'clock, and I wanted to say thank you. I'm glad each of you is here. We all ready? Very good. Thank you very much for coming. I am excited to talk tonight about diabetes type 2. We're actually going to run through all the different types of diabetes, but we're going to spend the majority of our time on diabetes type 2 because tonight we've got a message of hope. How to prevent it, how to reverse it, what causes it. And I want to especially, I know you see this every night that we talk, but I want you to especially be mindful of this one if you're on insulin. Because when you adopt the changes that I'm asking people to make this week, it could lower your blood sugar and your insulin dose may need to come down. And your doctor is qualified to help you with this, but your doctor won't know unless she knows what your blood sugar numbers are. So you may have to test your blood sugar more frequently if you're on insulin. And of course, let your doctor know if you're adopting the plant-based diet, if you're starting an exercise program, to make sure that your blood thinner dose can be adjusted and your blood pressure medicine can be adjusted if that's needed also, because these changes can happen. When I was with the Engine 2 immersion as the medical director, my job was to cut insulin doses for the type 1 diabetics 20% per day, because that's how powerful it is, what we're going to be talking about tonight. And what we're going to be talking about is an epidemic. The prevalence of type 2 diabetes diagnosed in the American population over the last decade has risen 80%. And why is that? Have our genetics suddenly changed? Well, genetics do play a role in all the types of diabetes. There are many factors that enter in, but the good news is we can outrun those genetics by modifying the other factors that play into it. But diabetes type 2 causes a lot of suffering. Some of the complications of this disease are that diabetics are more likely to suffer a heart attack. Their arteries plug up 20 times faster with cholesterol when a person has high blood sugar, and 10 times faster even if they're only pre-diabetic. They're more likely to suffer cancer and stroke. Together, these three killers are the top 3 killers of Americans, with cancer rapidly overtaking heart disease and stroke combined. And there are other things that people can suffer, such as kidney failure. Diabetes attacks the kidneys, and the vasculature of the kidneys can plug up, and so kidneys don't get their blood flow, and they can't filter the blood, and thus people end up on dialysis. Yes, people end up on dialysis because of high blood pressure as well, but the good news is the same diet that reverses the blood pressure reverses the blood sugar. We don't want people to suffer memory loss. Did you know that Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's dementia, has a nickname? It's diabetes type 3. And that's because the same 2 factors that cause insulin resistance and diabetes type 2 cause Alzheimer's and memory loss and the aging of the brain so that it loses its function. And of course, everyone knows that diabetics are much more likely to have visual problems. There are some diabetics who are now getting shots right into their eyeball. These are saving their vision, that they're buying them some time, but how much better to never need a needle to come anywhere near your eyeball. All right, let's talk about the types of diabetes. Isn't it amazing how many types there are? Most people don't know this. Diabetes type 3, you see that it's in quotation marks. The reason for that is that it's a proposed name for Alzheimer's, and it's controversial, and I'll tell you why. You see that the one at the bottom of the list, diabetes type 4, is also in quotation marks. It is also a proposal, and the subject is controversial. And let me just make a remark about why the controversy. Big money is involved in treating diabetes. Some people are making lots of money treating diabetes type 2, and they may lose money if people find out how to prevent or reverse diabetes type 2, 3, or 4. And those who might lose money might have an incentive to not believe what we're going to discuss tonight, to throw some shade on it. When we discuss the steps that we can take to outrun our genetics and prevent diabetes or even reverse diabetes type 2. So, diabetes type 1.5 is an autoimmune disorder, as is diabetes type 1, and diabetes type 2 is where we're going to spend the majority of our talk tonight, because that's the one by far most common. All right, so let's run through the different types. Diabetes type 3, as I said, is a nickname for Alzheimer's dementia, which features a loss of brain power and memory. This is caused by insulin resistance. There's plenty of insulin around, but it cannot work correctly. And there's also a dysfunction of another hormone, and that's called insulin-like growth factor, which is a very important component of causing cancer. Anyway, so dysfunction in that, these things occur specifically in the brain of people diagnosed with dementia, which is nicknamed diabetes type 3, because the same things that cause diabetes type 2 cause the dementia and the Alzheimer's. Isn't it hopeful to know that even if we've got the genetics to suffer Alzheimer's disease, we can outrun it by the food choices that we make? That's a lot of hope right there. Diabetes type 1.5 is called LADA, or latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. Now, this is a slow progressing disease, and the pancreas stops producing adequate insulin. Something triggers, some insult triggers the pancreas to make antibodies to attack the cells that make insulin. They're located in the pancreas. They're called the beta cells and the islets of Langerhans. And this slowly damages those cells so that the person no longer makes insulin. These people have to inject insulin to live and to control their blood sugars. And if you have abnormalities in your hemoglobin A1C, your fasting blood glucose level, your fasting insulin levels, then you might want to go for some of the fancier blood or urine tests. There's a test of anti-insulin antibodies. That's the most important one for this one. But there's also the C-peptide test, which can be tested on urine or blood. And diabetes type 1. This is an autoimmune disease just like LADA, or latent autoimmune diabetes of the adult, and both of them, both type 1 and type 1.5, need to inject insulin. However, this one, instead of being a slow progression, is usually a sudden onset. And in younger people, children or teenagers, the pancreas stops producing adequate insulin because something triggers the immune system to make antibodies to attack the pancreas. Again, those beta cells in the islets of the islets of Langerhans in the beta cells. Sorry, there we go. All right. And so, would you be interested in knowing what one of the triggers is? Not the only factor that causes diabetes type 1, but would you be interested to know what one of the triggers is? Well, it's casein. Casein is the principal protein found in cow's milk, dairy. And this cow milk protein, like all proteins, is a long chain of amino acids, and a protein is a chain of amino acids that's folded, and it's got a particular structure. Now, a peptide is also a chain of amino acids, but it's short and not folded. On the back of the casein molecule at the very tail end is a peptide, and would you know that peptide has the same amino acids in the same order, the same sequence, as the end of the human insulin molecule. So when a baby is fed commercial baby formula, which is based on cow's milk, unless it's based on soy or other, but usually most of them by far are based on cow's milk, some people who have the perfect storm of maybe a virus and the genetics, and we don't know what all the factors are, it takes more than one factor, but when they're exposed to casein, they are triggered to get diabetes type 1. And this is a controversial thing, but in Finland, where there's a very high consumption of dairy, they know about this, and they have curtailed the amount of cow's milk given to infants. Okay, diabetes type 2. This is the most common one. This is where we're going to spend the majority of our time. It's an epidemic of suffering. It is associated with body fat, but not always. But there's something else that is associated with, and that's what we're going to spend our time talking about. Now, type 2 diabetics don't necessarily have to inject insulin unless their doctor does not understand how to use food as medicine. And there are people who find it much easier to inject a medicine into themselves every day than to change their diet. And the choice is yours. I don't judge anybody for what they choose to eat. You can eat whatever you want. But for me, I used to be pre-diabetic. And I was in my mid-30s. Now I'm in my 60s. So did my very slender husband, Sean. We had blood tests in the pre-diabetic range because we didn't know the principles that we now know and are bringing to you tonight. So, diabetes type 4, this is a proposed term for diabetes in the older people. It's caused by insulin resistance. That's the same mechanism that causes type 2 diabetes. But those older folk are not obese. They're not even overweight. So why do they have it? And can they reverse it? I think they can. Okay, are we at risk for type 2 diabetes? If we don't test our blood, we may not see it sneaking up on us because we may not realize, just like I in my mid-30s was very amazed when my hemoglobin A1C was creeping up into the pre-diabetic range. I was shocked at that because I was slender, I was exercising, I was vegetarian. I thought that I was doing okay, but I was eating a lot of dairy, a lot of eggs, eating oil. I just didn't know, and I was an emergency physician working night shifts. It's well known in emergency medicine that working night shifts takes as many years off your life as smoking a pack a day for 10 years. And anyway, so what are our levels of hemoglobin A1C? That's a blood test. What are our levels of fasting glucose? That's blood sugar, glucose, sugar. And what are our levels of fasting insulin? Most people have never had their fasting insulin tested. But this is one of the ways that you can see whether this disease is gaining on you. So it's a good test to ask your doctor to order for you. If we don't know our levels, we don't know that we could be at risk and we could already be in danger. We could be this close to diabetes and not feel it. So I hope that you'll get fasting blood work done. And if your body fat percentage is normal, I would suggest that you get blood drawn every year if you're willing to go to the doctor and ask them to make sure that they're ordering these tests for you, as well as a lipid panel and a TSH for your thyroid stimulating hormone. If you are carrying excess body fat, according to what your mirror tells you when you're dressed in a swimsuit and looking in the mirror, if you are looking in the mirror and you think, maybe I have a little excess body fat, maybe you should test more often than once a year just to make sure, especially if your numbers on the first test of the year are borderline. Okay, so I want to talk about the word sugar. There are two meanings, well, actually there's more than two, but in the medical world, two meanings for the word sugar, and it's kind of confusing. Are we talking about the sugar that we eat, that white stuff that you can pour into the teaspoon, or are we talking about the sugar that we test on a blood test or in urine? Blood glucose is another way of saying blood sugar, and this can be tested. Dietary sugar is what I say when we're talking about the sugar that we eat. Just wanted to make that clear because it's sometimes confusing to people when the word sugar is tossed around and people aren't sure nobody thinks of white sugar as a health food, right? So people know that that's not healthy, but they may not realize in which context the word sugar is being used. Okay, so what should our blood test results be? When we're testing blood for glucose, which is blood sugar, whether it's a finger stick that we can do at home, or whether it's a venipuncture where at the lab they're drawing the blood, we should have a fasting glucose well below 126. If it's 126 or above, and it's a fasting, that's a diagnosis of diabetes. If there is a random, in other words, not fasting in the morning, not having eaten no food for 12 hours, no beverages except water for 12 hours. If it's not a fasting, then it's called a random. And there's a special kind of random that's really exceptionally good at helping us diagnose diabetes, and that's called a 2-hour postprandial. Post means after, and prandial means a meal. So the 3-month average of your blood sugars is called hemoglobin A1C. Blood glucose is sticky. The sugar we eat is kind of sticky too. And think of cotton candy, how sticky that is. And so blood glucose, like sticky cotton candy, sticks to the tail end of the hemoglobin molecule, letting us measure a 3-month average of blood sugars over the past 3 months. Welcome, we're so glad you're here. And so the hemoglobin A1C is a very different value than the fasting blood sugar. It's a much lower number, but it can help us to see, okay, how are the fasting blood sugars at night when nobody's checking blood sugar, in the middle of the night? How are they averaging over the day when nobody's checking blood sugar like they do in the first of the morning? So the 3-month average of your blood glucose level should be less than 6.5 in order to avoid a diagnosis of diabetes. If your hemoglobin A1C is greater than 6.5, that's a diagnosis of diabetes. All right, and what about pre-diabetes? That's the phase of the disease before full-blown diabetes. But the risks that I talked about are still gaining on the person. Those risks are still prevalent for the person. The person is actually diseasing themselves. They're hardening their arteries and hurting their vision and hurting their memory. If a hemoglobin A1C is greater than 5.6, in other words, if it hits 5.7, which is what mine used to be in the mid-30s, if it hits that, then we are known as pre-diabetic. Now, pre-diabetic patients don't have to take medication, but if they don't get on a different road, lifestyle habit-wise, in other words, if they don't change their diet and exercise pattern, if they don't change their beverages and their sleeping patterns, they may not be able to outrun diabetes, especially if they have a family history. So, according to the Mayo Clinic, a pre-diabetic fasting glucose level is greater than 100. And the 2-hour postprandial, so that's a random, not fasting, but 2 hours after a meal, after you've finished the last bite of the meal, is greater than 140. That's pre-diabetic. And then fasting insulin levels. Now this one, fasting insulin level greater than 6, you're not going to see that in the literature. You're going to go searching for that on Google or online, and you're not going to see that. The official number for fasting glucose level too high is only for diabetics. They don't tell you about pre-diabetics, and that is greater than 25. When the fasting insulin level is greater than 25, a person is thought to be diabetic type 2. And a fasting insulin level greater than 6 means that a person could be on the slippery slope. Their pancreas is overproducing, burning out, working hard, nights, weekends, holidays, and getting tired, and the blood insulin level is rising, trying to keep those blood sugars normal, trying to keep the person from becoming a diabetic. But the day comes when the pancreas burns out, and a burned out pancreas could mean that a person then is fully diabetic and can't keep up, and the doctor wants to put you on insulin. Okay, so why do we care about prediabetes? It's risky. The same risk factors for diabetes, yes, to a lesser degree. The pre-diabetic has more time than the diabetic, who's really facing some serious complications. Kidney failure, heart attack, memory loss, blindness, cancer, and stroke are all gaining on the pre-diabetic, and we need to know what our test levels are every year. If we don't know our level, we could be in danger. And so that's why I urge you, please get your fasting blood work drawn so that you will be able to take action as I did in my mid-30s, because now my blood tests are normal. I've changed my lifestyle, and you would think, because diabetes is more common the more you age, you would think that here I am 25 years later, that I would be even more pre-diabetic or almost fully diabetic like both my parents. But fortunately, I learned the secrets we're going to talk about tonight, and I hope that you will not be offended by any of them, because some of them may really amaze you. You know, once upon a time, I had two parents, and both of them were diabetic. And my father did not listen when I learned about the plant-based diet, and he died at age 67. My mother, fortunately, changed. Now, it took her until her 80s, until she changed, but the good news is, even in your 80s, she reversed her diabetes. She's off her medication. She's here with me in Pine Bluff this month at age 95, and I'm grateful that I still have one of my parents. I'm glad one of them listened. Okay, insulin resistance, the cause of diabetes type 2. So, does the dietary sugar that I eat cause my blood sugar to go too high? Well, it depends. Yes, if I'm insulin resistant. So if I'm already insulin resistant, and I eat, white sugar, yeah, it might. But what is sugar usually combined with in most desserts? And I'm talking not about the sugar in fruit, but I'm talking about the sugar, refined sugar, white sugar, in donuts, in cakes, in cookies, and pies, in milkshakes. What is it combined with? Fat. Yes, that's what it takes to make desserts really doubly addicting. Not just the sugar, but the fat. You combine animal protein and caffeine, like in chocolate, and you got the quadruple whammy. It's really addicting. Anyway, so let's take a slender teenage boy. Let's say he's 13 years old. And what if that young man is not insulin resistant and we feed him a ton of cotton candy, just cotton candy all day long? Is that going to make him diabetic? No, because he's not insulin resistant to begin with. So what causes insulin resistance? If I'm a normal teen, does eating white sugar turn me into a diabetic? Well, here to answer this question is Dr. Ferdinand Samuel. Or is the cause of diabetes type 2 something different? Let's welcome up Dr. Ferdinand Samuel. You've met him before. Here we go. Many of you probably know Dr. Samuel. He's a physician who served the Pine Bluff community for many years. As an anesthesiologist, Dr. Samuel has relieved pain for thousands of people while protecting their airway. Dr. Samuel, eating oil or eating sugar, which causes more diabetes type 2?
Well, if we think diabetes is high blood sugar, we think eating sugar would cause high blood diabetes too, isn't it? But actually, it is the eating oil that causes diabetes too.
Isn't that amazing? That's news to most of us, isn't it? It certainly was news to me. Most people don't realize that eating oil causes way more diabetes type 2 than eating white sugar in our diet. And as this presentation unfolds tonight, we're going to see what the reason for that is. Okay, Dr. Samuel, diabetes and alcohol. What is the connection?
Well, there was a study from Mayo Clinic that clearly showed that alcohol increases the risk of diabetes, especially if this alcohol consumption is binge consumption.
Binge consumption. What does it mean to be a binge drinker?
Oh, it means that you drink excessive amount of alcohol in a very short period of time.
Okay. So you're really slamming them back, okay? What type of alcohol is the most common beverage for binge drinkers?
Well, the most common alcoholic drink is beer.
Beer.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Beer
makes sense.
is the most common alcohol for binge drinking.
Yeah, more than 67% of binge drinkers, it's alcohol. And so do most people think that this link between alcohol and diabetes type 2 is controversial?
Yes. Some people cite some studies that claim to show the opposite to what we are talking about, claiming that alcohol is associated with lower risk of diabetes.
Why do you think that would be?
Wonder why? Would you like to kill your cash cow? There is a industry that wants to promote the sale of their product, beer and alcohol, and they want to introduce some doubts, some misstudies. Actually, in 2017, there was a study in Australia that showed that alcoholic industry has actually misrepresented the facts, and so confusing people, giving them false information.
Very good to know. I see. Thank you, Dr. Samuel. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's not eating white sugar that causes diabetes, and you can reverse type 2 diabetes on a low-fat, oil-free, whole food, plant-based diet, even without medications. Well, some people may need medications as they adopt the changes, but some people are going to be able to get completely off of their medications if they understand how dietary fat and animal foods promote diabetes type 2. So let's look at one of the studies from 40 years ago. At Vanderbilt University, 100 non-diabetic men aged 40 to 50 years old were collected in a group, and they said, okay guys, we're going to feed you all the same thing. All 100 of you are going to eat the same thing for a month. We're going to feed you 2 different months, 2 different diets. So they ate the same thing for 1 month. We're going to find out, is it a high-fat diet that makes people diabetic, or is it a high-sugar diet? And what do you think the researchers thought the answer was going to be? They thought it was going to be the sugar, right? So they started the high-fat diet first. And so here all the guys went for 30 days on the high-fat diet, and it was a high-fat diet. Many Americans are eating more than 50% of their calories from fat. The great majority are eating 35% or higher, but this was a 65% of the calories from fat in this diet. Very similar to the ketogenic diet. Which diet do you think made them diabetic? After 30 days on the high-fat diet, each one of the 100 non-diabetic men became diabetic. They got diabetes type 2. And did their genetics change in that 30 days? No, it didn't. Their diet changed. And then, whoa, that was pretty shocking to the researchers, so they had to reverse that diabetes, so they got them on a low-fat diet, heavy on the plants, and then they tried again, this time with the high-sugar diet. And what do you think happened? Of those same 100 men with their same genetics who had become diabetic type 2 on the high-fat diet, not one of them became diabetic on the high-sugar diet. So, since they had the same genetics, do genetics play a role? Yes, they do, but are genetics the biggest component of diabetes type 2? No, they're not. They're one factor among many, but we can modify the other factors, and that's hopeful news. Okay, so just to recap, Vanderbilt University found about 40 years ago, 1 month on each diet, high fat versus high sugar. High fat diet caused 100% of them to become diabetic. High sugar diet caused 0% of them to become diabetic. The same guys. Okay, so when people with a genetic predisposition eat oil or animal protein, they become insulin resistant. This is the underlying mechanism whereby we become diabetic if we have the genetics for it. So let's talk about that. Each muscle cell has a locked door, and insulin, which is a hormone, has the key to unlock muscle's door. Insulin lets blood glucose or sugar enter the muscle door, and blood glucose cannot get into the muscle without insulin's key. But if we're eating animal protein or dietary oil, we plug up muscle's lock. It's as if gum is dried in the lock. In fact, doctors call this intramyocellular lipid. I don't know why they just can't say fat in the diet plugs up the lock, but they gotta call it intramyocellular lipid. Intra means inside, myo means muscle. The cell, lipid is the fat. And so if you eat oil or animal protein, it blocks muscle's door so that insulin's key won't fit and muscle's door won't open. You see, the glucose wants to get inside the muscle to make it strong, to warm it up, to give it energy. However, if the blood glucose cannot enter to feed the muscles, then the blood glucose stays in the blood instead of in the muscle, and blood sugar levels start to rise. So, when the blood glucose cannot get in, it can't enter the muscle door because oil or animal protein are acting like gum dried in the lock of the door. The glucose stays outside the muscle, in the bloodstream, blood sugar levels start to rise, and then you can test that. And so what does the body do in response? It's got this problem. There's plenty of insulin in the bloodstream, but it cannot work right. The muscle door is blocked, causing insulin resistance, which makes us first pre-diabetic. Eating oil or animal protein has caused insulin resistance, which makes us eventually, if we don't change, diabetic type 2. So, if you eat meat or oil, how close are you personally to pancreatic burnout? What is that? You see, the pancreas is tasting the blood flowing by, saying, hey, that's too sweet. Well, I am the pancreas, and my job is to make insulin. So since this blood is too sweet, the blood sugar level is too high, I better make more and more and more insulin. And so the pancreas works harder and harder, trying to force those muscle doors open, causing a rise in fasting insulin levels, which we can measure. But finally, after a few years of Dairy Queen and Burger King, the pancreas burns itself out from overproducing insulin. How do we prevent diabetes type 2? We need an oil-free, low-fat, plant-based diet of whole, unprocessed foods. But there are some other factors to keep us from being one of the Americans who was diagnosed with diabetes over the past decade, as the numbers rose by 80%. If we exercise, remember last night I said you don't have to exercise to lose weight. I've had patients who were going from 500 pounds to 400 pounds and they couldn't. They just felt like they couldn't. Their knees hurt too much, so they didn't exercise, and yet they still lost 100 pounds in a year going on the low-fat, oil-free, plant-based diet. Then when they got down to 400 pounds, then they felt like walking and they felt better. But exercise does wonderful things for diabetes, for the immune system, for the memory, for the mood, as well as preventing cancer. Exercise is very anti-cancer. And if you can exercise, there's a special time that you get more out of it than any other time. And that is, boom, right after a meal. You see, right after a meal, if you'll go out and take a walk, put the perishables in the fridge, don't even wash the dishes. I know that sounds a little creepy, but just go right out for a walk, because if all you have is 5 minutes, do that 5 minutes. If you've got 20 minutes, hey, even better. But if you take a walk right after a meal, not run, but hopefully you can't hear that. Good, okay.
We can, but it's
Okay. All right. And it's spam too. Turn that phone off. Sorry. Okay. All right. And so if you exercise every day, 6 days a week, 30 minutes a day, that's really going to help you reverse your diabetes, especially if you put it right after your meal. And if you avoid caffeine, alcohol, and vinegar, this has been shown to really help you reverse your diabetes much faster, or prevent it in the first place. But sleep is the unsung hero of preventing diabetes. You see, you can do everything perfectly in the plant-based, oil-free, low-fat, unprocessed food department. And you can do the exercise daily, and you can avoid alcohol, caffeine, vinegar. But if you don't get to sleep early, before 10 p.m., or if you have sleep apnea and you don't treat it, you may still remain diabetic, because that's the power and the connection of sleep and diabetes. It's integrally connected. And so it's very, very important that you get that early bedtimes. When it comes to reversing or preventing diabetes, 2 hours of sleep before midnight are worth 4 hours of sleep after midnight. And I love it when I see people lifting up their phones and taking pictures. Please do that. That is great. I want people to take pictures of these slides and remember them. So if sleep apnea is present, or if you suspect that it might be because you snore, now not all people with sleep apnea snore, but if you do snore, please get tested and get treatment. Yes, it's possible some of my patients have reversed their sleep apnea as they've lost the weight. It's not everybody with sleep apnea, though, who is overweight. I've got some skinny teenage boys in my practice with sleep apnea. It's just the way their throat and everything is shaped. So, and water for energy and weight loss. Water provides no calories, so you wouldn't think it would make you feel more energetic, since calories are a source of energy, but it makes, when we drink 64 ounces for an adult before 5 p.m., when we drink water, especially in between our meals, it makes us feel more energetic. By rehydrating our muscles, which are almost 80% water, we feel greater muscular power. Water lightens our load by relieving constipation, and it puts a spring in our step. So you're going to feel better, and you're going to do better from a diabetic standpoint if you'll drink the 64 ounces of water each day if you're an adult of at least 5 feet tall. All right, and so extra help to reverse diabetes type 2. Walk right after the meal. Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, supper like a pauper. What's a pauper? A poor person. What's supper? For those of you not raised in Illinois, that's the evening meal or dinner. I don't know. What do you call it in Arkansas? You probably call it dinner, right? Yeah. So some say supper, some say dinner. Okay. If you can avoid snacks, you're going to reverse your diabetes or prevent it much, much better. If you stick to just eating 2 or 3 times a day, you're going to do better. And if you feel the need for snacks, it may be that you did not eat enough beans and starch for breakfast. And when I say starch, I want you to be starch smart, like we talked about last night. Sweet potatoes are a great thing to eat for breakfast. Beans have a lot of resistant starch. Everybody knows beans are kind of hard to digest, and that resisting the digestion that beans do keeps your blood sugar levels stable. When blood sugar levels drop low, you feel the need for a snack. You feel like, oh, I'm shaky. But this is why I eat beans and veggies for breakfast, because it keeps my energy levels good all day long, and it lets me have a big breakfast. Now, of course, in order to be able to eat that big breakfast on a day when I'm busy, I'm out the door trying to, get to work or whatever, I prepare the food the day before so that all I have to do is heat it up in the morning, because mornings are hectic. And so a big breakfast, a medium-sized lunch, and a smaller, lighter dinner. For people trying to outrun genetics for diabetes, if you can stop eating calories by 6 p.m. and not eat any calories no matter how hungry you are after 6 p.m., you're going to fight the tendency towards diabetes a lot better. Eating late at night, especially if it's high fat and animal protein, that's just like a recipe for turning a genetically predisposed person into a diabetic, whether they're overweight or not. Of course, if we're overweight, it makes diabetes much more likely. Plant-based diet. What evidence do we have from the Engine 2 immersion that it could do great things for diabetes type 2? For those of you who may not have been here on previous nights, I was hired as the medical director for the employees of Whole Foods Market who came through the Engine 2 immersion, which was a program formerly run by Rip Esselstyn, Austin's plant-based firefighter turned health educator. And Whole Foods Market wanted to decrease healthcare costs by letting the Engine 2 immersion make employees healthier through food and lifestyle changes. So we got some fantastic results, and as I said at the beginning, I had to cut insulin doses 20% per day for my type 1 diabetics, and blood sugars improved for most of the participants. Some of them got off insulin within 1 week. Isn't that great news? That's kind of amazing. I mean, I loved seeing these results. They were fed buffet style. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They could go back for seconds and thirds, and they did. They ate all that they wanted. They loved the taste of the oil-free, low-fat plants. And actually, in Rip's program, they were actually fed snacks too, because he wanted them to like the program. He wanted them to like the food and not feel deprived. So they got snacks, and I still got them off insulin by the end of a week. Not everybody, but for those that did, what joy. Okay, and did we offer them exercise? Yes, but it was optional. It was voluntary. We didn't mandate the exercise. It was only an hour a day. They were sitting there was like 40 hours in that week of lecture, plus evening meetings for fun stuff, but they were actually sitting more in the evenings than they were moving. And so yes, they exercised if they wanted to, but, and truly, the people who got off the insulin, they exercised the most, because hey, it really helps with diabetes. Okay. So now, let's welcome Pastor Michael Wolford. He serves the Pine Bluff community as a Bible-believing Christian. Pastor Wolford?
Well, you've shared some powerful things with us tonight and some really good news.
Thank you.
Wow.
Diabetic suffering and the Bible. What hope do you find offered there?
Well, in Psalm 34:19, as you see on the screen, it says, "Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all." The verse before, in verse 18, says the Lord heals the broken and hearted. And he gives hope to people, and he gives help to people. And that's the way God is. I'm so glad for such a God. In Psalms 107, verse 19 and 20, it says this. "Then they cry," speaking of people like us, real people like you and me. "Then they cry unto the Lord in their trouble, and he saveth them out of their distresses. Verse 20 is extremely significant. It says, he, that is God, sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destructions. Aren't you glad God sends his word to heal people? It's a beautiful thing. And by the way, as you read God's word and you pray, reading the word quickens faith, as we learned last night. From Romans 10:17, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. And as your faith grows and you ask for help, God empowers you. And he sends his word and he heals you. It's very powerful. In Psalm 62, we have a similar song, a similar promise. It says in Psalm 62, verse 17, it says, now I'm getting to the wrong verse. The verse simply says that God sends his saving health among the nations. And that verse is powerful. In fact, God wants to send his saving health to how many nations?
Oh.
Everybody.
Yes.
In Acts 17, Paul, the apostle, said on Mars Hill at Athens that in God we live and move and have our being, and that God has made all men of one blood, that they can seek God, and he helps people. I'm so glad we serve a God that loves to help real people like us. And when we call on him and we need help, he's ready to help. Praise God for the word.
Thank you, Pastor. A lot of hope in that. All right. And so we have proof not only from my patients and the Engine 2 immersion participants, but also the Adventist Health Study 2, where 96,000 Adventists from USA and Canada were studied. And it was found in the Adventist Health Study 2 that the closer you are to eating only plants, the more normal the blood sugar. And this is one of my former patients. You've seen his picture before this week, but I just love showing this picture because it never gets old thinking about all the people who no longer need diabetic medication. And if you've got diabetes type 2 in your family, I hope that you'll come to our Monday night support groups so you can taste this food and figure out how to make it and why to make it. And what do I eat for breakfast? I eat these categories of food. I eat beans and veggies for breakfast. They keep my energy levels highest. And as a 60-something, my memory level's the sharpest, and they keep my blood sugar normal. And yes, I still test my blood sugar. And these are categories of food. Beans could be lentils or split peas, dal. Greens could be cooked or raw. Squash, that represents all the other veggies that are not green, and yams is specifically the starchy veggies, sweet potatoes and regular potatoes. And if you don't have arthritis, some people with arthritis, they can't handle nightshades, and so they stay away from Irish potatoes, but they can eat sweet potatoes, which is a totally different kind of a vegetable. But they're both starchy and they're good. And there's yuca and boniato and malanga from other countries, plantains and other starchy things that we can eat that will keep our energy levels good as we go through the day. It also keeps our mood good. And I try to get breakfast eaten before 8 a.m., and that's kind of what it looks like. And what about nuts? Is it nuts to go nuts on nuts? In other words, if we eat a lot of nuts, is our blood sugar going to rise? Well, not immediately. When you eat nuts, they take a longer time to digest because they're high in fat. So if you eat nuts, your blood sugar may not be that high if you test 2 hours after the meal, but over the next week, the fasting blood sugars could rise because nuts are very high in fat. Are nuts healthy for us? Well, it depends who we are and what our challenges are and what diseases we're trying to outrun. If we're struggling with our weight, trying to lose excess body fat, if we're struggling to get off diabetic medications, high blood pressure medications, then it's best to eat very, very sparingly of nuts if you eat them at all. There are some people with severe heart disease who are needing open heart surgery. That's what the doctor tells them that they need. And those people have chosen to go completely free from nuts and avocado and coconut and all that because they're very, very very much not wanting to have another heart bypass. They've already been through that once. They've had, stents, and they're trying to get their diet very low in fat to reverse the most serious diseases. So if nuts are kept low, I use that word sparingly, then we can have much better blood sugars. So come on Monday nights for our support group and see how good it can taste even, without nuts. And we're going to study about more of the details about how to reverse diabetes type 2, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and autoimmune diseases. Come on Saturday night. If you know anyone who has rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, psoriasis, and if they're wanting some hope or they'd like to get off medications, please especially bring them this coming Saturday night when we talk about autoimmune disease and painful conditions. And of course, if there are people struggling with their weight and they would like to taste plant-based cookies, chips, ice cream, come on Monday night. This coming Monday night, a week from tonight, on the menu is cookies. So, all right, and come on Tuesday nights to the group support for Bible-based hope. And Pastor Wolford will be there with me on Monday night, and I'll be there with him on Tuesday night. We're a partnership. We're doing this together for Pine Bluff because we believe that people will succeed if they use all the things that can possibly help them. And spiritual help, that never hurts. So we're going to study on Tuesday night what the Bible says about how to find freedom from addictions to nicotine, alcohol, drugs, and foods that act like addicting drugs. Because the biggest, most widespread addiction is our addiction to unhealthy foods, high in sugar, high in fat, containing animal protein. There is spiritual power for victory in real life when we study the Bible together. And tomorrow night, Tuesday night, we're going to talk about hormones, not just female hormones, not just reproductive hormones, but the hormones for men and other hormones. And even people with hormonal diseases in their family history can help prevent going down the same road. So, just another rundown of some of the topics coming up for the rest of the week. On Wednesday, blood pressure, one of the most common reasons to visit the doctor, and heart issues and stroke. We're going to talk on Thursday about preventing cancer. And on Friday, one of my favorite subjects, depression and anxiety. We hope for better night's sleep. And again, as I said, on Saturday, autoimmune diseases and painful conditions. Okay. And remember that if you have questions, there's a link that you can click on healthreboot.com to enter in your questions. If you don't have access to the internet, talk to Pastor Michael Wolford or Dr. Ferdinand Samuel in the exit hallway, or some of our registration table people, and they will help. They will type your question in. They've got their laptops there. Okay. And about the Monday night support groups, we're going to talk. I know that you're itching to hear, okay, how can I make this more practical? What's an Instant Pot? An Instant Pot is a pressure cooker. I just love mine. The Instant Pot locks in flavor, and it is the busy cook's friend because when the food is done cooking, the amount of minutes that you set, it shuts the heat off so that the food is not going to burn, but it keeps it warm for hours. It will keep it warm for many, many hours. You could go to the gym. You could go to sleep all night. You could go to work. You could hop in the shower. You can do things besides stay at the stove ready to turn the burner off so it doesn't burn. And that is how it frees you up because, hey, we want to make this as convenient as possible. It also locks in the flavor and food tastes good. And I'm going to take questions on the website. All right. And we're going to do, yes, for sure. Wasn't that a blessing what Pastor Wolford said tonight? So be sure to come on Tuesday because the reason I put the slide in here, that's when I'm going to start handing out some free prizes. I've made a video, and as you heard on the first night, we're not selling anything. And although, yes, these are for sale on my website, veggievore.com, if you don't want to come Tuesday night to win the giveaway, it's there. But we're giving away one of these this coming Monday night, Diabetes and Retreat. And we have actually 5 other videos on various subjects. So what about soy? All those different questions. Is soy good for us? Is soy bad for us? Is it high in fat? Does it turn a boy into a girl? So we're going to talk quite a bit about all these kinds of detailed questions. We're going to answer those kinds of questions at our Monday night support groups. Thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure to discuss these secrets with you, and I wish you good health. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Yeah, I've been working on it.